Selamat pagi, Bapak Ibu. Iya, join studio ya. Terima kasih Bapak Ibu dan saudara-saudari semua yang sudah bergabung di Zoom. Mohon izin untuk menunggu sebentar. Bagi Bapak Ibu dan teman-teman yang bergabung di Zoom, silakan jika ingin menyalakan kamera, tetapi mohon berkenan untuk mematikan mikrofonnya. Ya. Jika Bapak Ibu dari luar UGM boleh diberi nama, kemudian underscore asal institusi ya, supaya kami mudah juga untuk mengenali Bapak Ibu. Di sini tadi ada dari Bapeda, Pemda Kabupaten Tebo juga ada ya. Dari ya, we have around 28 ya, Pemda-Pemda juga ya. Baik. Mhm. 11. Ya, ya. Kita mulai ya. Baik, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan, Good morning everyone. Heartfelt thank you and warm welcome to our guest lecture session, special from Dr. Sonia Roitman here. She is Associate Professor in Development Planning at the University of Queensland, Australia. Here we have also guests, yeah, not only from UGM students, but also from Paguyuban Kalijawi. Maybe later we also have a representative from Arkom as well will join us. But here we have in this room students from doctoral program of urban and regional planning. Can you raise your hand? Pak Faizan, yeah, Pak Faizan. And students from MPWK UGM, Magister of Urban and Regional Planning. Yeah, mostly. Yeah, but we have also students from an international undergraduate program and also Bachelor of Urban and Regional Planning joining us online. All right. For today's lecture, before starting today's lecture, I would like to introduce Ibu Sonia, Dr. Sonia Roitman to all of you. So, Dr. Sonia Roitman contributes to the field of development planning and urban sociology, includes influential research on urban inequalities and how they manifest in cities. Her research interests include housing and poverty alleviation policies, the role of grassroots organizations in urban planning, disaster planning and informal practices, and gated communities, segregation and planning instruments in global South cities as well. Her main research locations are Indonesia. We've been collaborating with Ibu Sonia for quite a long time, since 2015, yeah, with especially with Prof. Bobby. Maybe Prof. Bobby later can give a short opening speech as well. And Samoa, Uganda, Argentina, and also Australia. And her most recent book is Roitman and Rukmana, with the title of Routledge Handbook of Urban Indonesia. Yeah, you may find it in online. Yeah, and she is leading a Koneksi project on the socio-ecological impacts of flood infrastructure in Semarang, in collaboration between University of Queensland, Undip, Brisbane City Council, and Semarang City Government. And with we are very lucky to have Dr. Sonia today and to share about the contributions of planning practice or Indonesian planning system within the context of Global South, global planning practice. Yeah. But before Ibu Sonia start, maybe Pak Bobby, would you like to give an opening speech or?
To say something about her, yeah. It's kind of long time friend ya. Tahun berapa ya Sonia ya? 2013 ya, hampir 10 tahun ya. And this is very good for our students to show our collaboration between Gajah Mada and Queensland University. I remember at that time, 2013, right? I was still the head of the director of master program and will transfer to Pak Sani that time. And because I'm the one who initiated so many collaboration program, including double degree. So when I plan to travel to Australia, I asked Pak Sani to join me, kind of to transfer, to continue the collaboration. And that time, Sonia was sitting on the back, I guess, as a kind of you, perhaps, I don't know, Sonia at that time. But after the meeting, Sonia approached me, Pak Bobby, what about and from a bunch of people at that time, actually only her who then continue apa itu to really realize the discussion. Yeah, I think 1 year after 2030, you came here, right? Yeah. 1 year something, and really started the collaboration until now. Very, very interesting, long time collaboration, and one among so many collaboration which still last until at least last year. We don't know this year, yeah, Sonia, was the International Joint Studio. Very interesting program in which more than 20 Australian students coming to Yogyakarta for 2 weeks, working together with UGM MPKD student, PWK ya, SY ya. Ya. That's very very good ya. Tapi aku punya cerita lagi 2020. Remind me on ini para runners ya. At that time I remember in Brisbane. After meeting, I used to walk around the city. Tiba-tiba Pak Sani itu nyalip, aku lari. When I start from that, when I back to Indonesia, I will start running. Ya. Sejak itulah aku menjadi running, ngikuti Pak Sani, dan Pak Sani selalu waktu itu aku membawa Pak Sani untuk konten YouTube, but then I also got something from Pak Rani, the running tradition until now, so it's already running for 10 years ya, kira-kira begitu ya. Okay, sorry, this personal. Start, Sonia, please.
I don't need to hold it, yes. Yeah. Hello, is this working? For people in Zoom, can you hear well? It's another microphone, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, it's clearly Sonia.
It's clear? Okay, great, thank you. So, selamat pagi. Thank you very much for the invitation, Pak Bobby, Bu Yani. Sorry that I have to do the presentation in English and not in Indonesian. Maybe one day in the very long future. So, well, thank you very much for coming here, and for people who are on Zoom. Some of you know I've been here already for 3 months, so it's been really good. And thank you, UGM and Planning, for hosting me this time. And I think that it's always very interesting to see how we can continue the collaboration. I'm going to show you a couple of other things in relation to what Pabobi was talking about, because I think that it's, in a way, it's useful for you to maybe understand my journey to come here, right? So can we go to, you want me to move? So more or less, I really want to try to get to the conclusion in a way that we have time for discussion. But these are more or less the topics that I want to discuss. So, but very briefly, what I wanted to share with you is more that my background is a bit of an interdisciplinary background. So I studied first sociology. I'm originally from Argentina. I also studied housing policies as a master degree, and then I did my PhD on planning. But it was always more like the social aspects of planning and the social and the political aspects of planning. So, so my work is usually in the sort of mix or overlapping between urban sociology, planning, development. Yeah. So, and I have always been very interested in how we see, in particular, social inequalities in cities and how that manifests into different things, whether it's housing or whether it is the opportunities that we all have to participate in our cities. So for a long time, I did a lot of research, many years, on gated communities, but again, trying to understand what are the connections in between different groups. And I'm not going to be talking about that lately, but here, but I've been moving a bit more into the discussions on environmental issues. And it's not that I'm an expert on environmental issues, but I think that at the moment it's very hard to be discussing any issues to do with cities without really considering the environmental problems that exist on cities. And our planning program at UQ that Pabobi mentioned, he went in 2013 and he visited the university, and I had just started at UQ in 2013, but I was told that I had to start a research program in Southeast Asia, maybe Indonesia, but I wasn't sure. I had never traveled to Southeast Asia. And for me, it was all more or less the same. But because I met Pabobi, and I was like, well, maybe you can invite me to your university and maybe I can come to Yogyakarta. And this is how I came to Georgia in 2014. And I've been doing work here since then. So for me, it's been a very, very inspiring and very important and rich experience, learning a lot about what's happening in Indonesian, especially as an outsider, right? So, but 2 years ago in our university, there was a big discussion about reshaping some schools and moving around some disciplines. And so planning was moved to architecture within the Faculty of Engineering, technique as here, right? But to me, that's, for us, the planning program at UQ, to me at least, one very important point is the convergence with geography and with environmental management. So now one challenge is for us to keep that when the other disciplines are in a different school and in a different faculty, right? And because of that, I ask, oh, can I stay in the two schools? So at the moment, I'm in the two schools, but mostly in architecture, design, and planning, but I also have to do things in the other school that now it's called the School of the Environment. And I think this, I mean, this is my case, but I think this shows, and it might be important to all of you, that at the moment, it's very hard to just think about one discipline. And many of you come from other backgrounds, probably, that it's not planning. So how do we put those skills into value? Which is to this is, yeah, since 2015, we have been doing a joint studio between UGM and UQ, and also with other stakeholders like ARCOM, Kalijawi. We have here Bu Atik as the representative. Hello, Bu. Thank you for coming. And so again, and that course that started in 2015, it's been a very important course for the students at UQ. We have done it every year, apart from the time of COVID that we couldn't travel, and hopefully we continue that because I think that it's a course that it's very useful both for students here, but also for students at UQ who come to Indonesia in most cases without knowing anything about Indonesia, right? Thank you. So what I'm going to be discussing today is very much based on a book chapter that is in this book. So this book was published at the end of last year by Eduard Aspinall and Melinda Sabirani. Some of you might know Bulinda. She works in political science here at UGM. And this was a conference organized at ANU, at the Australian National University, 2 years ago. And it was discussing issues about urban Indonesia, and in particular, emphasizing the governance discussion. So I was asked, there were different disciplines, and I think this is very important in this book. And if you want the book, you can email me. I can send you the PDF of the book. So I think that what is really interesting in this book is that it's written by people, many people who have nothing to do with planning. It's all how different disciplines look at the urban and the urban in discussion in relation to Indonesia. So I was the only one who was asked to write a bit of planning. And again, it was an interesting exercise because I had to assume that people will not know anything about planning, right? But I put that discussion in the context of, if we think about the global south, and we will be talking about that in other slides, what is it that we can learn from what is happening in Indonesia? And this is what I want to discuss now. Thank you, Yanni. So the final point is that Yanni mentioned, so 2 years ago, no, more than 2 years ago, at the beginning of COVID, I talked to a colleague, Dan Roitman. Some of you might have read about his work. So he's based in the US. And for me, one of the discussions is that, of course, as someone who doesn't have a lot of access to material on Indonesia and what's happening in cities, which is not in Indonesian because I can read very basic Indonesian, what is the material that is available? And there isn't really a lot. So we decided to put together this book. And the most important part of this book was that we wanted to emphasize the work done by people in Indonesia, but from different levels of seniority. So we have a chapter by Bobby, but we also have a chapter from PhD students, right? So we had 64 people writing. We also have a chapter by Kalijawi, Bu Atik, and her friends. And so it was really important to put together the contributions of different organizations and different people working on Indonesian cities here. And the book is in a way inspired by Vanessa Watson. I'm going to talk about her a bit. I don't know if have you read anything from Vanessa Watson? No? So if you haven't, I really encourage you just Google her. She passed away 2 years ago. She's she was a very well known South African scholars from Cape Town, and she was very influential in terms of what is this global South. And I'm going to mention her idea, but keep in mind this idea of seeing from the South that we will discuss later. So just to finish with this book, yeah, go the next one. Thank you. So again, if you want the PDF, I'm happy to send it to you. Maybe Pavobi also has it. But basically in this book, we explain the situation in 19 Indonesian cities. And the idea was also that we wanted to show the diversity of what's happening in Indonesia, because you also have, with the limited material that there is in English, you tend to see the same cities all the time, right? So we made also, hello Padeva, welcome. So we also made the decision that we wanted to, for these cities that I usually call like the the usual suspects like Jakarta, Bandung, even Surabaya, even Georgia, we said, well, we will have only up to 2 chapters, but we really want to show what's happening in different sizes of cities around Indonesia. And these are the 19 cities that we discussed in the book. Thank you. So just now to have some ideas, maybe we can pass around the microphone.
They have it.
Yeah. So, but maybe it's more, since you are all familiar with planning, maybe it's more to start the conversation on what do you think planning is? Which is a bit difficult. Hello, Buyani. Good to see you. Thank you for coming.
Anyone?
What's planning? How would you define planning? Or what are the elements that you think that are important when we are talking about planning? And people in Zoom, maybe if you want to put it in the chat, we can also check the chat. Thank you, Yanni. Anyone who wants to say, what is planning? Some of you are new to planning, but some of you already know a bit. And even those who are new, Bobby was telling me that this is the week of the matriculation. So what did you learn this week in the matriculation lectures? What is planning? Yeah, jalan-jalan. What else apart from jalan-jalan? Yeah. What are we talking about? What are the elements that you can think of? Is it like, I don't know. I don't want to say. Yeah. No, it's just, yeah. What is it? You don't have to give a definition. Just say what comes to your mind when you are talking about planning. Strategic. Things that are done. So, and strategic. Thank you. Any other? So there is one that's planning is a process to achieve our targets. Okay, great. Thank you. What else? Any other comments? Yes. Can you, if you shout, I repeat, because if you don't have a microphone, or maybe, thank you.
Probably from a philosophical standpoint, it's the human way of organizing already a chaotic world as it is.
Okay. So an organizing way, a way of organizing. Great.
Through empirical data or through phenomenology.
Phenomenologically, yeah. Strategizing goals. Okay, thank you. Yes, please. Use the microphone next to you.
Planning is the key of development. Planning is a process to reach a goals with the systematic and strategic process.
Okay, great. Thank you. So very important keywords from different places. Do you want to put the whole definition, Yanni? The next slide. The next. Just. Yeah. Okay, so this is the definition that comes from UN Habitat. I like this definition because I think that even when it's old, sorry, I think it highlights the important elements. So on the one hand, and I'm sure in your courses, you have already or will be discussing that there is an important debate about, well, in planning, are we more talking about the process or are we talking about the outcomes? What is that we are going to be achieving, right? And in this definition, it's saying, well, it's both. We need to think about how we get to the outcomes, how we get to the targets that we want to achieve. But at the same time, I think that it's very interesting to, first of all, understand that it's about human. So we are talking about people who live in cities or in the settlements that you are trying to work with and improve. There is, some of you mentioned objectives, goals, so there is something that you want to achieve, something that you want to gain, something that you want to change, to transform. But I think also the important thing in this definition is that you also have different stakeholders. Yes, so you have ordinary citizens, and this is very important in the discussion about the Global South. You also have the government that plays a very important role. You also have the private sector. So how could we put together all these important elements when we are discussing issues about planning? Thank you. So, and you can pass them on, yeah. So these are some elements from planning. Some of you might have heard about Patsy Healy, an important also planner from the UK. I think she passed away last year. And for me, this is also interesting because it's showing, first of all, in planning, we have this sort of time dimension, right? So we have a present, but we also are looking at a future, and we need to keep in mind what's happening in the past, right? And so that is really interesting for us to try to pay attention and to guide our actions. The second point here is that planning should be something that is to help everyone and to help what it's saying here, the many. It shouldn't be something that is benefiting just a particular group of, people, and it's kind of not benefiting the majority. And more than that, even putting negative impacts on the majority of the population. We also need to understand that there are lots of interconnections between topics, as I mentioned before, and how, at the end of the day, this is also about public action, where it's coming from the government, where it's coming from ordinary citizens, yeah? And again, if we are doing that, it has to be a process that it's open, that it's participatory. We will discuss about that later, and how we emphasize the importance of the process. Thank you. Okay, anyone who knows what this is? Abba? Suleiman? Suleiman, no. Anyone who can guess what this is? Mm-hmm. Anyone who wants to guess?
Iceberg.
Iceberg? No, what an iceberg. Yeah. It's not an iceberg, but it looks like an iceberg. Yeah. It's one part of the world. Where is this? Abba? Which continent? America. Which America? Which part of America? South America. How do you know it's South America? Okay. So this is South America, but why it was not easy for you to look at and guess that it was South America? It's usually because we see South America the other way around, right? So in here, the South is pointing to what we usually consider to be the North, right? If you disclose that, yeah, just go one more. No, just. And the whole thing. Yeah. Okay. So this is an old piece of art. So 60 years ago, it was done by an artist from Uruguay called Joaquín Torres Garcia. He was part of this school of art called the School of the South. And basically what he's trying to show is, well, how America can be upside down. And why is he putting this like the continent or South America the other way around? Is because he's trying to challenge the idea that we can also think that our North is the South. So what we consider to be the South could also be the North, or the other way around, right? So why do we need to think that the South has to be the South and not the North? Depending on where you stand, yeah? So this is what they started to challenge 60 or more years ago. So this is also trying to show a bit of the same. So what's the common element here? There are 4 different images, but what is in common? What's the common theme? What is it showing? Maps, nations, the Earth, like it's showing our planets, right? But what is the main difference if you compare these 4 images? What's the main difference? I think there is a comment in the chat. What's the difference of colors? Yes. Inverted, yeah. So what's the difference in the 4 maps? The center of the map is different, right? And even if you look at the one here, for us will be what? Bottom left. It's inverted, right? The other 3 are looking at the normal way, but again, it's challenging. What's the idea of the normal, yeah? So now my second question is, which of the 3 maps, not the one at the bottom left, because that one we usually don't use, right? But which of the other 3 maps did you learn at school? That you learned at school, that you use at school? Which one did you use? Who used the first one, top left? Top left. Top left, anyone? Well, so the top left that has Australia in the center is the map that you see in Australia.
I like because Indonesia also at the same time.
Ah, well, so you see, yeah.
Australia, Indonesia.
Yeah. So who learned the one at school, the one top right? With the Americas in the center.
America plus Trump.
Yeah. Anyone who used that one? No? Who used the bottom right, where Africa is in the center? Who used that one at school? Online. Yeah. Thank you, online. We are reading your chat. Thank you. Well, so I also learned from the one where Africa and Europe is in the center. It's basically because it's Europe that is at the center, right? So it's the European thinking that is trying to be kind of emphasized. So, but the most important idea here is that it's really important for us to think about where do we position ourselves and how do we look at things from which perspective. And this is going to be very important in the conversation on the Global South. So anyone who knows these characters, I always put them in my lectures. Anyone who knows them, have seen them before? No? No one? Okay, so this, the girl is called Mafalda, the boy is called Felipe. So they are the most important cartoons from Argentina, but they are so when I put them in the lectures, all the Latin American students or students even from some parts of Europe will know who Mafalda is and have read about Mafalda and have all the cartoon books from Mafalda. Then other countries, it's not so so common, but it has been translated into many languages. So the story about Mafalda and why I use Mafalda a lot is because Mafalda was created at the time of the dictatorship in Argentina, and it was used as a very, she's a character that she's questioning things all the time. She's a girl who is supposed to be 6 years old, but she's always asking questions from like conversations that adults will have. And so she has a group of friends, and there are always conversations within the friends, and each friend has a particular stereotype that the artist is trying to emphasize. The artist was called Joaquin Lavado Quino, and he died a couple of years ago. But yeah, so Mafalda has become like a very important symbol of contestation. And for Mafalda has always been very important to challenge your ideas in terms of asking questions about, well, at that time also, there was still a bit of the end of the Vietnam War. So she's contesting a lot of why the war is important and what's the purpose for our world. So she's very worried about our planet. And, you know, for many people, it will be the beginning of people who care about environmental issues globally. Yeah. Anyway, so in here, for me, the most important part is for us to understand that, yes, if we think about the South and what's the discussion in the South, how do we apply that to planning? And in a way, it's also thinking about the different approaches that we might have when we are talking about planning. So for me, this is something that, so when we think about planning, and probably in your different courses, what are the type of planning that you discuss, approaches in terms of, for example, in Australia, there is a lot of discussion about strategic planning, right? There are also discussions about what's the modernist kind of approach to planning, right? What was in the past considered as, you know, who was creating cities, who was working on the cities and why. There is also what in some countries in Latin America, but in particular in Spain at the end of the 90s was seen as strategic planning, which is a bit different from what in Australia is seen as strategic planning, which was more in terms of the competition between cities and marketing issues and how you could try to, you know, attract investment to your cities in terms of your strategy, right? So all those are type of planning approaches that you might be familiar with, right? These approaches are not what we are going to be discussing now, which is what is usually called Global South planning. It's also called Southern planning. It's also called off the map planning. It's also called from the South planning, right? And there are lots of discussions also about what it is and what it's not. But in a way, it's also trying to contest some of the ideas of the other approaches. Thank you. So the main point or the starting point is this image. So this image was developed in 1980, so it's quite old, but it's trying to make a distinction that is trying to criticize the idea of the developed and the developing world. Yeah. So this image is a bit different from that. Why is this different? So this image is trying to show that the ones that we here can see as the north and is usually considered developed is what at that time started to be called, but not so sort of spread at that time as the global north. And the rest that says developing, it's the south, but it's the global south. So when you are thinking about north and south, and then you see this image, what is it that maybe doesn't make a lot of sense to you?
Why Australia and the South? No.
So, yeah. So Australia, but also there are other countries. There is a big discussion about China. Where do you put China? Also, the line there is a bit difficult because Singapore, it's another place where people will be discussing a lot, right? But basically, Australia is, for this discussion that we will see later, is global north, even when geographically it's located in the south, since we look at the map from this perspective, right? So this is also to show that this is not a geographical division of the world. It's a division that has to do with other ideas, yeah? What could be those ideas that are reflected in this map? What are there common elements in the north and in the south? The countries that you know?
White and non-white.
White, non-white, that could be one. Yes. Urbanization could be another point. Any other ideas? So we can move. Thank you. So very much what the Global South planning is trying to say is, first of all, the distinction is first a distinction that is related to what is called these post-colonial theories. Very much they are saying, well, the countries in the South, they used to be all colonies. And the reason why they might be more poor at the moment is just a historical consequence of that relationship. It's not that they chose to be poor or less poor than other countries, right? There are also political, social conditions that were in those countries in the South. So what it's trying to emphasize is, first of all, this is not just a random thing that happened, right? There are historical conditions that one group imposed into other groups or countries that came to this situation that we are now on. Why Africa is poorer than Europe? Why Latin America is more poor than Europe? Well, because they took all the wealth to Europe. Yeah. The other point that is trying to emphasize is that it's very important to try to, and this is why they are trying not to use the word developing and developed, right? If we are thinking about developed, we tend to see as positive or you have already achieved. So the first question is, if you are a developed country, does it mean that you are not changing anymore, that you have already achieved what you wanted to achieve, or you still have room for improvement? Yeah? The second point is, when you are talking about the developing, is this from a negative perspective, something that you have not yet achieved? So the discussion here is going to say, well, we need to break this binary distinction between good and bad, developed and developing, and that's why they are using North and South. And they are saying this deficit perspective, thinking that some countries still lack particular things, is not going to contribute to the conversation, right? But also it's saying, well, things are even more complex than just white and black or rich and poor. So this planning approach is also emphasizing a lot the importance of diversity, the importance of understanding that even within a particular city, we have multiple situations, so it's not a homogeneous situation. The importance of inclusion, of social justice, and the importance of local knowledges. And in planning, the significance that all different people and all different stakeholders contribute with their own skills and knowledge is very important. And at the same time, and conceptually this is going to be important, is that they are also arguing that we are not talking about the same concepts, or the same concepts cannot be applied in the same way to particular situations. And the most important or a very usual discussion is to do with poverty or with informality. So they are saying, when we are thinking about poverty, we are not thinking about the same. Poverty is not the same in Australia, poverty is not the same in Europe, poverty is not the same in Indonesia. So what do we need to do in order for that concept to become a bit more relevant if we are considering the particular situations of these cities or this context? And the same applies to several concepts. Informality is also a very usually discussed concept, because and Vanessa Watson, for example, is one key author that discusses that a lot. They are saying, well, actually, if you think about informality in Indonesia, where 70% of the activities or the ways people live or the ways people go around in their everyday life has to do with informal actions, it's not the same as in Australia or in Europe, where the informal is so limited, right? And it's not so significant. So I maybe put them all. So very much in terms of the planning perspective, some of the ideas and many of the authors that I mentioned here, you have two South African and one from India. So it's also like showing that this discussions come from the South. People from the South who are trying to say, well, the ideas that we are getting from the North, they are not very successful or useful for us. So the first one is what they call looking off the map. The discussion of the map is challenging the idea that up to very recent, there were lots of discussions that only were about what was happening in Europe, what was happening in these global cities, as if the rest of the world was not even there. So they are saying, well, actually, you need to look off the map that you usually look at. You need to look at what's happening in other regions. And this is why I put the maps before. Like, how do you look at maps in a different way that you normally would do? The second idea has to do with this Vanessa Watson's idea, the conflict of rationalities. This has to do mostly about planning, because she's saying, well, actually, one problem is that there are many people, and this has changed recently, but up to 2-3 decades ago, that was very usual. So there were many people who were studying planning in the North and then trying to apply planning from the North in the South, and it didn't work. And so she was saying, well, you have two different rationalities, the formal and what the guidelines say and what you should be doing, blah, 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 as it happens in the North, as it is applied in the North. And then you have what is happening in the South, which is completely different. So you cannot put them together. So she's talking about this conflict of rationalities and how planning in the South can deal with that. The other concept is diversity. Again, trying to understand the role that different cities play, even if they are small cities, even if they are not global competitive cities. Yeah, and that's why there is a very now well-known concept that is looking at the ordinary cities, not looking at the global cities, looking at the cities we all live in, which is the majority of the population. Yeah. So in a way, it's how we use different concepts from the perspective we are in. Thank you. You have here, and I can send the presentation to Yanni or Papobi. So there are lots of discussions about to what extent the Global South is useful or not useful. So this is one video you can look at home. This is part of 3 videos. So in here, you will see that there are many people who are doing work on this who might disagree. No, it's not useful to have this distinction between North and South. Some other people will say yes. And then the question is, if that's the case, do we have a particular theory that is looking at different concepts from the North and the South? And again, some people will say yes, some people will say no. So now we, after this sort of introduction into what the Global South planning discussion is, I just wanted to start a bit of the discussion on Indonesia, if that's okay. Maybe put them forward. So again, from my external understanding of the Indonesian planning, so I wanted to have a bit of a discussion of, if we look at, for me, the 2 main, we could put a previous sort of group here, which is after independence, right? But if we look at the new order and the reformasi, what are the similarities and differences in terms of the planning system? And you might be very familiar, more familiar than me, I'm sure, Yanni, Papovi, many people here. But basically, we have a situation in which still now, the role of the state and the role of the government is very important. And in particular, and still now, the central government is very important, yeah? We also see that that has changed a bit, and now, and since Reformasi, the local governments had more opportunities to make decisions. There are lots of decisions in planning issues that are made at the local level, but, and in comparison to other countries, still the central government plays a big role in deciding, you know, the directions of urban development in the country. At the same time, we have a private sector, and in particular, I would say a selective group of the public sector that is very powerful And in many cases, it's the one making lots of decisions about the future of the cities, the present and the future situations of the cities, yeah? In a way, and for the case of Indonesia, has been very well documented about in particular in the New Order, the very, very close relationship between a private sector and the particular powerful developers and the government, right? And how that also influenced the way many cities were developed, yeah? But at the same time, we also have similar problems, both in the two periods, like we still have a lot of corruption, especially in planning issues in terms of, and corruption doesn't mean necessarily, and this is also interesting to discuss, it's not only about money, because sometimes people tend to only think about money. Corruption is also issues that when you don't follow the regulations, right? When you are supposed to follow regulations, when you disregard completely why you have particular guidelines, right? So, and that something that has changed as well is that now corruption is also more, because also, and this is not to blame the local government, it's also to show how difficult for the local government it is sometimes to make sure that you comply with the regulations when you have to deal with super powerful developers, yeah? When the power is so different and so unbalanced between developers and local governments. So again, how can we sort of address those sort of problems that are still the same, but maybe with different institutions, right? Maybe the corruption or lack of compliance was before more relevant to the national government. Now it's more relevant to local governments as well. And the other thing that has changed, and this is in a way something that is very positive, but at the same time something that has to be improved, is yes, communities have a role to play and have more opportunities to participate, but at the same time, there are also lots of problems with that and lots of situations that it's more a tokenistic approach, a more sort of ticking the box approach rather than a real participation from communities. So just to move forward so we can have time for discussion, for me, there are, on the one hand, structural conditions in Indonesian cities and also more recent challenges. To me, the recent challenges are more related to also environmental problems in cities. So I will show some slides on these structural conditions and challenges, but one of the main ones, yes, no, one more, yeah. One of the first important issues is that in comparison to other countries in the Global South, Indonesian cities are growing and have been growing since independence very, very fast, yeah? So if we think that at the time of independence, only 12% of the population were living in cities, and now 60%, that's a huge change in such a short period of time, right? We also know that the other issue here is the density and the big number. What is it to have now nearly 284, I think it is, million people living in the country, right? With a population growth rate that is still very high in comparison to what's happening in other countries, yeah? But the other thing that is very important, and if you are interested in that, there is a book chapter in this book that I showed before that is discussing that, is that also this urban character has to do with this reclassification of what is urban and what is rural. It's not that suddenly there are more people who are all living in cities, it's that there are localities that before were not considered urban that now are urban. And that has to do mostly with the services and infrastructure available in those situations, in those settlements, yeah? And what I think is very interesting here is you have really very clearly growth that is encouraged on the one hand by the government, where it's national or local, then on the private sector very strongly, and then by communities, because at the same time, most of the cities are built by ordinary people in a self-help way, organically, and in most cases, informally. So the other point, maybe put everything, yeah. So the other point that is also really interesting, oh, there is one more, I think, yeah, is very interesting in the Indonesian discussion is that because the country has had a very successful economic development program in the last 2 decades, that has increased the groups that we call middle class. And it has increased them a lot, but also makes that, well, we also don't look at the middle class as one single group, but we also make big distinctions between who is poor, who is vulnerable, who is the aspiring middle class, who is the middle class, who is the upper class. And this is based on what the World Bank consider in terms of income. So there are lots of discussions about, well, is this useful, not useful? But what I wanted to show you here is that on the one hand, we have what we consider or what the World Bank consider as middle class, who is those people who get per day around $8 to $38. So it's quite high. And it's about 20% of the Indonesian population. These data are about like 5 years old, but the interesting thing is that this group of 20% is the group that is really driving consumption in cities. And that consumption is not only going to buy a coffee from Starbucks, it's also consumption in terms of housing. It's also consumption in terms of shopping centers. You know that the number of shopping centers in the country, it's very, very high in comparison to other countries, right? So it's cafes, global retails, you go to some shopping centers and you have all the shops from around the world that are there. And of course, those services and shops and commercial areas have to survive. So there is some sort of demand for those services, right? And that has a very, very important impact in cities. For me, at least, coming to Georgia since 2014 and now, I can see the changes a lot. Oh, this cafe was not there, and now there are 50 new cafes. So, you know, things have changed a lot. But at the same time, we still have a very large group of the population who are considered poor or vulnerable. And those are the ones who are really building self-house, building, constructing, having their own warons. And this is the everyday life of cities. So what's also the significance of that in how we see the city? So the second point is that because of this economic development, of course, poverty has been reduced a lot in Indonesia. And I think that in here, we also need to be a bit careful about how we use data. So because at the moment, if you look at the official data from the World Bank, it's saying that only 2% of the Indonesian population is poor. And again, that many of us will disagree with us. So it also depends on how you define who will be poor, right? But also, there are also political reasons why governments, and in particular World Bank or IMF, they are also trying to show that their policies are working. So there are less poor people here if you compare that with X number of years ago. So you also need to consider that. But what I think that is very important in Indonesia is that now it's very sort of understood and established that poverty is not just about income. Poverty has to do with access to services. Poverty has to do with access to decision-making processes. So there is a very well established understanding, and this is translated in lots of programs from the government like Otaku, PMPM, that is, well, we cannot just address the physical, or we cannot just address the income. We need to provide programs that are more multi-dimensional. So that is very clear, and I think that's very positive from an Indonesian perspective into its discussion about the Global South. The other point is community participation. So of course, since Reformasi, there is more emphasis on that. There are lots of programs from the government that really explicitly require more community participation. But at the same time, we know that sometimes this is not real, this is not well done, this is not efficient, or this is still very segregated. The same people have access to participation, but this is not democratically a possibility, let's say. And the last 2 points that I think it's very important in terms of informality is, well, first of all, the land tenure. So in here, we know that in this conversation about avoiding binary situations, you cannot be just talking about land that is formal or informal, or situations, and usually it's not only formal and informal, but it's legal and illegal, right? There are lots of situations in between. How do you address that? And how do you understand that maybe we also need to change that informal is not necessarily negative or bad, yeah? And the other point that is also interesting here is that as some groups have become richer, in the sense like the aspiring middle class and the middle class, they have now better incomes, there is more inequality in terms of income, yeah? So the income inequality, particularly in terms of Gini coefficient, has increased in the country, right? And it has now become what is considered as very high. It's around 38 or 39 points out of 100, which is considered something that is very, very unequal or unequal, yeah? So for me, the recent challenges are to do with housing. Housing is not that it's recent, but it has become now because it has been, on the one hand, addressed by the government, but on the other hand, there are lots of things that need to be done. And of course, here, Bobby might be able to speak more, but you have a backlog that is around 30 million housing or something in the country, but also more like 1 million of new houses required nearly every year. But also what I think that is not always discussed is that you also need to make this distinction between the quantitative deficit of housing that has to do more with the number of houses that you need to, for the demand that you have, but also the qualitative aspect of the housing deficit, right? That in here has to do not only with the building materials, but mostly with overcrowding. Yeah, overcrowding as a concept and as a category is very different here than what it could be considered overcrowding in other places, right? And for that, you also need to consider, well, what are the categories that help us here? Because if you will be using probably categories that you use for overcrowding in Australia or even in Argentina, the whole country will be overcrowded here, right? So in terms of housing. The second challenge, I think, and for all of you, us in Yogyakarta, you see that every day, is waste. Waste is everywhere. Waste is also in relation to plastic. We don't know what to do with the plastic, and we need to become better in terms of how we manage that plastic. And I think that one thing that is so in here, there are lots of small scale initiatives that have worked really well. At the moment, they have not been scaled up. And so that's the challenge. But I think that it's also part of understanding that this is not just a government responsibility. This is something that everyone has to contribute, and maybe just buying less plastic bottles, right, or something. So what is it that we can all do in terms of thinking about what is it that we are going to do with the waste around us? And the final point is about disasters. And again, so all of you know that Indonesia is one of the most vulnerable countries in terms of disasters because of the location. And as here, I think it's Pak Ika Putra, who sometimes gives this a session to the students in the joint studio, and I think that he says something like, "Oh, we are very lucky because we have all the type of disasters, supermarket of disasters." Yeah. So in a way, yes, the country is very vulnerable, right? But I think that, and I think that also is more difficult to deal with because of situations of informality, because of situations of lack of compliance with regulations, because of situations of, different messages from the government in terms of what is allowed and what is not allowed. Yeah. But at the same time, it's also showing how different topics are related. And so if we are thinking about disaster, it's not just thinking about an environmental issue like a flood, but it's also thinking about poverty, is also thinking about housing issues, is also thinking about access to services, like, for example, water or sanitation in relation to the floods. So how can we put that into more multidimensional approaches to understanding these planning issues? And I think that because of that, Indonesia has lots of opportunities in terms of how do you contribute to planning, but also how you contribute to the discussion on what the Global South planning is. So the first one, I think that it's very positive that because of reformacy and because of more encouragement from different sectors in terms of participation, there are lots of discussions here in Indonesia about governance, which is not the same in other countries. So here is like who is allowed to participate, who should be participating and is not participating at the moment. What are some mechanisms that could improve that? For example, the whole idea of like the Muslim ban, and is that really an effective tool for participation, or what are the problems? What is it that needs to be changed, right? The second aspect that I think is very positive is that I think this is culturally, so I always compare Indonesian culture with Australian culture or Argentinian culture. And because here you still have such an important role of the collective, which is not the same in countries that are very individualistic as Australia, or countries in between, like Argentina, which I usually place in between the Indonesia and Australia. But I think that in here, because the culture is still so strong about the importance of the collective, you have the opportunity, and you see that in many cases, like Kalijawi is a very good example of that, how you have very proactive and organized communities. And also, you have community groups that also are very strong. So they have managed to survive for very, very, very long time. They have very clear goals, and they have been able to achieve very important goals. Which again, I think that you don't have the same in other countries. And the final point is that I think that there is a lot of innovation and resilience. Yeah. Yesterday we had a conversation with some people in another university about the role of resilience. And I think that here there is also a bit of the discussion about, well, when you are talking about resilience and communities that are resilient, do you mean that the government doesn't have a role to play anymore? And I think it's not the case. And I think you need to be careful with that. But at the same time, you have lots of communities that are slowly becoming more resilient. And one key aspect for that is the use of local knowledges, right? And this is like aligned with what the Global South perspective is saying. Like we should be putting in value what the local knowledges are, which are as valuable as the technical knowledge that you can get from, I don't know, university or other institutions. Yeah. So the conclusion, and I'm very interested in hearing from you. So we will have like half an hour for this, hearing your comments. Well, I think that on the one hand, how the Indonesian planning system contributes to the bigger discussion about the Global South. Well, first of all, yes, you can see very clearly the historical and political conditions in the planning system and the evolution. How some of the concepts in the overall discussion are applied into the planning system. At the same time, more and more, and I think this is good and bad at the same time, communities are creating change. The problem is when they are expected to create change without other stakeholders to also become responsible or become involved in the discussion, right? You show a lot about diversity and adaptability, and you see that a lot, and the use of local knowledge. And I think that even if we know there are lots of problems, I think that it is a system that allows for participation, allows for inclusion, and hopefully it can become a bit more transparent, which is one of the issues we mentioned before. So I don't know if there is one more or not. No, yeah. So thank you very much. This one?
Yeah, Sonia overview. In the morning, just before the start the discussion, I sent to the group of the docent. Yeah, let's join the lecture. It's kind of warming up after a quite long holiday, and especially for the new student. I think this is really good warming up to start with quite overview, comprehensive overview of the start from what is planning, the global south perspective, and then issues in Indonesia, and even diakhiri dengan challenge and opportunity ya. Tapi yang penting saya kira adalah menarik justru kamu challenge mereka ya. Apakah apa yang tadi dikatakan Sonia sebagai opportunity itu adalah yang lalu in a global perspective itu juga bisa dikatakan as an Asian way ya, of doing things ya. Sonia, I should also I was the president of APSA ya, aku kan presiden Association Planning School di Asia ya. And actually very rarely among Asia society really talking about global south ya. Jadi kita tuh sebenarnya Asia ya Indonesia pun actually not really echoing the global southern sentiment somehow. Yeah, that's what maybe I'm wrong. Yeah, but that's what I maybe because also the concept of the critical global south perspective also coming from the Latin America, right? Africa and this yeah, and Asia maybe because Asian people not too critical. One thing, yeah, maybe they have their own historical perspective. Although most of the Asia also colony countries, yeah, in the global south, but not the way Asian things somehow quite different compared to the teman-teman dari Argentina, dari which are very critical. Even we learn about the story of radical kind of movement also started from that part of the global world, yeah, not really from the Asia, yeah. So what I'm going to say is that the Sultan itself, we learn from the maps, it also somehow have some diversity, if not using the term fragmented, and not really always thinking global Southern perspective. Yeah. And that's I realized even when I'm then joined the Global Planning Education Network, because I'm also still in the committee of the Association for Global Planning School. Still, people from questioning, or for them at least, yeah, to ISOP and so on and so forth, yeah, still thinking, questioning the global southern kind of perspective, yeah. Menarik ya, itu gitu ya. Of course, we talk about the unique of Indonesian urbanization. In which I use the term over urbanism, ya, pseudo urbanism, informality, ya, urban informality, or this kind of things. Yes, ya. But never.
Kuwi karo Jawa iki cerak banget
That's just
golek kena.
to open your
Iya.
critical view. Yeah. I just finished also, Sonia, two books interesting. The first one, very famous book on the history of Homo sapiens, yeah, the history of humankind. Yeah, talking about the uh, centuries, 100 centuries ago, between Neanderthal ethnic and Homo sapiens, which also coming from Africa. That's why also when we talk about the history of humankind, we also learn the term out of Africa. All humankind actually started from America, migrate to Europe and then migrate to Asia, including Australia and so on and so forth. So that's also interesting. The second book I was reading during the holiday was the Geography of Genius. Yeah. Jadi tempat-tempat where are the places in the world which consider have some genius. Yeah. Athena, yeah, of course. Yeah. Yes, only two spots in that book that consider the locus of some genius in the past. The first one is Calcutta, and the Calcutta also because of the Western influence. Yeah, the second was Guangzhou in China. Those two places are also producing somehow genius. Yeah, but in the term of Calcutta, the writer say that this is also because of the Western kind of influence, yeah? The coming of the British to the Indies, open business in Calcutta, and then start the glory of the Calcutta and producing genius, including very famous Tagore, ya. Siapa namanya? Tagore. Rabindranath Tagore, ya, consider. Ya, itu tambah saja ya. And last one, I like to start the discussion just yesterday untuk teman-teman yang ikut matrikulasi. We just walking around the Malioboro, and I said that last year Malioboro, Yogyakarta was considered a World Heritage Site, meaning that our city, Yogyakarta, already meeting some of the universal outstanding value, which also to some extent, yeah, could. Well, of course, we have a sampah problem now, but at least our city, designed by Pangeran Mangkubumi in 1755, somehow considered by UNESCO as the example of the good city, yeah, because they have a very nice ideological foundation, including actually related to the formal informal dichotomy, the history of social relation is the Manunggaling Kawulolan Gusti, and the blend between the leaders and the commoners. Yeah, I don't know whether it is then in the form of urban dualism, formal, informal, legal, illegal, this kind of things. Yeah, good. Yeah, sorry, I'm komentarnya terlalu panjang, tapi karena provoked by Sonia, I like to also respond to that. Silakan. Pertanyaan. Also those who are online. Silakan. Bebas aja ya, santai aja ya. Indonesia asal. Kan udah 3 bulan belajar bahasa Indonesia asal ya.
Yeah. Actually, you mentioned some things about informality. It's maybe not a bad things. It's piqued my interest. So, what do you think? Yeah, yeah. So, what do you think about the conditions of Indonesians urban right now? If I'm not mistaken, is the economic is more grow up the informality rather than the formality. How do you see it in the future? How we use it as moments or as a momentum or opportunity to grow as regions or cities or urban? My name is Hussein Muhammad. I'm from Master Urban Regional Planning double degree program. I'm going to Groningen in this July. Yeah.
That's all. Hi, Professor Sonia. My name is Vania. I would like to ask a question. It actually, I would like to ask about recent challenges in Indonesia, where you put your slide before. It also says that Indonesia is overcrowded, and I think, well, about the housing crisis in Indonesia. I would like to ask the solutions because Indonesian people, we keep on populating not just every year, but every week and every day. And maybe some people will say from housing, we can say that like we need more housing from the governments, but I think it's not the solution. Um because I think more houses will never stop because our people, we keep on increasing. So I would like to ask, is there any solutions except just from new housings? Thank you. Iya, Pak. Iya, Pak. Pani ya, Pak. Ya, ini. Ya. Thank you.
Gusti Rahadian, silakan jika ingin.
Ya. Hi, is my voice clear?
Yap.
Yeah, okay. First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity, and also your presentation was quite insightful for me. And I would give appreciate a big respect to Prof. Bobby and Ibu Yani. I'm the alumni of MPWK UGM. So yeah. Hello, yeah, perhaps everything is good. So I will also talk about the recent conditions about the Indonesian urban growth, especially in the city. I think that in recent years, people still stuck growing in the center of the cities. The driving force behind this phenomenon is because at least they want to be closer to their primary activities, such as public facilities, their office or school. And as an impact, the land value uplift becomes uncontrolled and there is competition through it. Some group of people, I think they tend to pick place to live, especially in the outskirts of the city. And however, the availability of adequate infrastructure is still questionable. So I want to know about your perspective about this. Do you think that these phenomena are also happening in other cities globally? What factors that we can consider making the urban growth over cities is appropriate controlled? And do you think any other perspective or pictures about what is the best balanced situations about urban growth? Thank you very much. I appreciate for the time.
Thank you, Mas Gusti. Mas Gusti is one of our alumni, currently being a lecturer in ITS. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for the 3 questions. Very interesting because they are very different, right? And I might ask for some help from Pabovi for the second question, but so in relation to informality, why I said that it's not such a bad thing, that was the question. I think that there are people here in the room who might have or might want to say more about that, the importance of informality. But I think that one very important issue in the Global South is that cities will not be able to exist without informality, right? So, and that has to do with lots of activities, starting with economic activities. So many of you who might have had breakfast this morning in the warung in the corner, or, you know, or or eating bakso, or, so all those activities, the majority are very informal, right? So my question is, if that would not exist, would you have had breakfast today? Or informal arrangements that exist all the time in terms of housing arrangements, that it happens everywhere and on different levels and different type of housing, from the very, very formal in terms of gated communities where inside there are lots of informal arrangements, right? To gated communities that you will consider formal housing but have not received planning approvals. So it's informal planning in a way, right? So you can think about how many examples of informal activities, from physical, economic, and everyday life activities, happen in the city, that it will be impossible for cities in the south to exist. There was a very interesting conversation, and I don't remember if Pabobi and Buyani were there in the 2 years ago in the Planning Congress in Bali. Yeah. There was a session on the IKN, and in that session on the IKN, there were some people, even from the IKN Commission and authority, and that's it, all we are going to say. But so one of the questions from participants to the IKN authority was like, how are we going to deal with informality in the IKN? And they said, no, in the IKN, there is not going to be informality, right? And so, and everyone started laughing because they were saying, of course there will be. Of course, you cannot think about any Indonesian city without an informal vendor, without the informal housing that is being provided, where there are people who cannot afford the formal supply for housing, and they need to have different arrangements. So there was a bit of a sort of criticism to the IKN authority at that time, saying, well, you are not really seeing what the real situation in cities is at the moment in terms of Indonesia. And this is not just in Indonesia. So like in India, there has been a very important movement, mostly encouraged by a social movement called SDI, Slum Dwellers International. And in India, the founder of SDI was a very important slum dweller who became very important, very famous. He was even nominated for a Nobel Peace a few years ago. He passed away, I think that 4 years ago. And so, but he advocated for what he called slum-friendly cities. And the reason for slum-friendly cities is because he's saying, if you are thinking that slums are not okay in a city, and he's talking about slums where it's not the concept that you will be using here in Indonesia, but he's talking about slums because this is the concept that it's mostly used in India. He's saying, well, actually, you would not have really cities functioning, because middle class or rich people depend on all the people who live in the slums for taking care of your children, for cleaning your house, for building your house, for taking care of lots of things that happen around you. That if you think that there are not going to be cities with informal situations, then you are wrong, right? So I think that that's the same process here. But there is also, I think, a situation in which we tend to think that everything is formal, and it's not. And I think that with the land tenure situation here in Georgia, that's a very clear example. I think that that has been an important development, I think, because in the past, it was only whether you had your land certificate, the freehold, that yes, you own your land, to the opposite, you don't have a certificate, so you are informal, you are illegal. So now lots of situations in the middle that they don't really mean that you are doing something wrong. There might be that you have permission, that you live in the Sultan ground, but you are allowed to live there. So you don't need to have ownership of freehold certificate, but you might have other situations. And I think that even from UN institutions, there has been more recognition of those situations, right? And I think that informality is something that we really need to think of as, yes, maybe there are situations in which you would prefer that to be formalized for particular reasons, but we need to understand that informality doesn't mean bad or doesn't mean wrong or doesn't mean negative. There are also lots of opportunities from the informality. Yeah. So second question, oh, Bobby is not here. I'm going to go into the third question first from Zoom because if he's here for the housing discussion, maybe it's better. So urban growth, and I think that the discussion was about like the urban growth and the periphery and the services, and yes, so in most cases, and I think in particular in the global south, still the growth happens horizontally, not vertically, right? In most cases. And what happens with that is that you have peripheral areas where the land is cheaper. That's why it grows in the periphery, yeah? Also, the other problem is who owns the land, because in Indonesia, that's a critical point that there are lots of big pieces of land that are owned by the private sector, not by the government. Then the government has less room for action, right? And decision-making when they don't have land available. And so because of that, I think that still the discussion is, well, yes, you have new areas that are in the periphery that are usually lacking good infrastructure, good services, unless it's being developed by a private developer and is aiming to very kind of high income people, like if you have a BSD or some of those like new cities, right, where all the services are provided, but it's very selective in terms of who has access to those services. I think the other problem is that more and more, and this is happening both in the south and in the north, is the discussion that, well, land is very limited, and water, access to water. So in many cities, the situation is that at the moment, you cannot really continue to grow horizontally. You need to start growing more vertically, even when that is problematic for some people. So in Brisbane, and it's global north, but that's the current discussion, that there is a lot of opposition to growing like increasing density, middle density in some central areas. Because many people want still have their big house with a big garden and all that, but in reality, there isn't really land. So of course you have this sort of double perspectives and some contradictions, but that is also happening in the south. And back to the question is, yes, it happens in many countries where you have poor people who live in the peripheries where there are no good services and infrastructure. Yeah, but at the same time, most people work or need to go to central areas. So that also creates lots of problems in terms of commuting, in terms of high cost of transport and all that. And the question about housing that you were back by Bobby, about the overcrowding and the housing situation and new housing. I think that, yes, it's complicated. At the moment, there is a housing crisis everywhere, because in Australia at the moment is the most important problem for the government and for citizens, right? And it has been the one driving even the political agenda and the elections, right? So we have a crisis everywhere, but one of the reasons we have the crisis is because also there are very important interests in terms of who plays around, who is allowed to build, and what are the costs of that new housing, right? I think that because of that, you also need to be more strategic in terms of the overcrowding. I think that that's also something that is very localized. As I mentioned before, like in Argentina, the version for housing deficit, for the qualitative deficit, is that if you have a house where the number of rooms without including kitchen and bathroom are, let's say that you have a house of 3 bedrooms, right? 3 rooms, living room, blah, blah, blah. So you cannot have more than 2 people in those rooms, right? So if you have coefficient that is higher than 2, it means that there is overcrowding in that room, in that house, right? So if you would apply that concept here, all houses will be overcrowded, right? Even the houses that are provided by the government, because they are breaking that particular rule, because you have one single room for the whole family, right? A family of 4 people, 5 people, whatever. So in that case, you need to be careful with the definitions and the indicators that you use. On the other hand, I think that, yes, the solution is not necessarily the new housing. The solution has also to do with, for example, here you have lots of vacant houses, and in Georgia in particular. So what's happening with those houses that are not really used? And to what extent, because I think that the government has a role to play in terms of putting some instruments that is going to allow for that situation not to happen, because that's not a fair situation. So that is increasing the housing prices a lot, but at the same time, there are many people who cannot benefit from the housing that is already available. So is there a chance for government to maybe regulate that, to put taxes? If you have a vacant property, you need to pay more taxes. And then it's your decision. You want to pay more taxes, or you want to put people or rent the house to someone who might need to live there, right? And the same with like the, what's the name? The housing ratio, right? So the housing ratio, that it's a regulation you might all be familiar with. Well, it's not, it's like from 50 years ago, and it's not really something that governments are able to enforce. Why? Because there is no land available, and the developers are saying, well, we cannot really do it. So the question is, do you need to change some of the instruments? Because if you have instruments that are not working, that nobody can comply with, it means that the instrument is not good. Or you don't have the authority to like make sure that people are going to comply with that. So in that case, I think that, but at the same time, again, as I said before, this is not to blame the local government, because for many of them, this is a critical challenge, and they cannot make the big developer, who we are not going to name, to really follow the regulations, because they have more power than someone working in Barbados Lemon, right? Even if we don't like it. So I think that that's a bit of the problem, but I don't know, Bobby, if you want to say more about the housing, since you are the housing expert in here.
But we are supervising to execute them. Wanted to inform you that we are supervising with Sonia and Thomas, supervising PSC student at Queensland, talking about questioning about the housing and social justice in Jakarta. Yeah, very interesting. Still in the progress. Yeah, almost final, but at least a good topics in terms of that. He tried to link between housing and a broader issue of social justice, something that never been discussed in Indonesia. Housing is just a practical issue, yeah. But I think it's important to link the housing issue into the idea, a broader idea of social justice, yeah. His question including whether Rusunawi is representing the policy that the government of Indonesia really concerned on social justice as stated already in the Pancasila.
Can I answer a bit of the, I don't know if I read one about the local knowledge, and then.
Gentrification.
What's the question?
Is that really issue?
Oh yeah. So I'm not the best person to mention a lot about gentrification. Some people here probably know more about gentrification in Indonesia. From just an observant point of view, you can see a lot of gentrification in Georgia happening right now, which I think is very interesting, and this is also part of this growing middle class, right? So maybe other people here want to say more about gentrification, but I think that the other point in terms of the local knowledge, I think that it's not so much about whether the local knowledge is put or is translated into the plans, but it's more in terms of when you are trying to make policies or create actions to address particular problems, you can acknowledge that there are local knowledges that are also useful. And to me, the most important part of this, a more clear example, is to do with disasters, right? So we know that, and this could be, like Merapi here or floods. So you know that for risk mitigation, there is a lot that it's not really linked to the technical knowledge that we have, but it's more people who live in the area. So how do they know that Merapi is going to explode? And it's not because the whatever meteorological agency is saying, it's maybe because, the air is going that direction, or the birds are flying into the other direction, or the smells is different, or whatever. So there are lots of signs that are not technical, but are from experience. And we need to make sure that it doesn't mean that it's going to replace the technical knowledge. It means that it's going to collaborate or contribute or provide a different view in what we do and how we solve problems. And in terms of floods, it always happens that you get people who live around there and they will tell you, oh no, but the water comes to this level when this happens, or when the water comes to this level, the problem is that, but when the water comes to that other level, the problem is that. So that's how we, or how you incorporate the local knowledge. I don't know if people want to say something about gentrification to answer the question or to.
Well, for the new student, yesterday we talked a bit about gentrification and really witnesses, in the field that gentrification is happening in Yogyakarta, but we have to be a bit sabar because my PhD student, Mas Chandra nih, supervised by Pak Sani, we both supervise our PhD student working on gentrification in Yogyakarta area. I with my friend from the Dutch already write a good nice paper on heritage gentrification with the case study of the displacement of the 400 household used to live in along the Benteng, now already moved to other places. Yeah, that's we consider as not really the Kraton-led gentrification. We don't really quick enough to use the term Kraton-led gentrification, then we use the term heritage gentrification. Heritage, if it is coming from the state, from the power holder, we can consider that as state-led gentrification. Other gentrification types is class-based gentrification, as well as economic-based gentrification. But good to remind that issue, yeah. I think Sonia also witnesses gentrification happening, something that, can be say new phenomenon, not really new, yeah. Already we started the 5, but it's good to start exploring gentrification because that relate to the issue of informality, urban dualism, the kampung, the poor people, the inequality, inclusiveness, and so on and so on, yeah. Itu gentrifikasi, ya.
Yeah. Price. Yeah, I cannot really answer a lot about the transport system, but I think that overall it's more to think about how, of course, land inequality or the access to land has to do with also income inequality and who has access to buy land when it's very usually unaffordable. But I think the main issue also goes to the instruments. What are the instruments that you can, as a local government or the central government, apply in terms of also making sure that there is a bit more of mixed use access, if that makes sense? So like different groups who also might have access to the land. So it doesn't have to be all land for high income houses, right? And you can make also agreements with developers. Well, you will be getting a lot of money. So from your profits, you also need to, because I think that's also a very difficult point, but I think that unless we make the real estate realize that for them, they also have a role to play in making sure that cities become better. Because if a city become better, it's also benefiting them. But there isn't really this sense of responsibility from the private sector. Oh, it's not my responsibility to provide housing for low-income people, but it should be. It should be, because you also need low-income people to live around your area. So how can you contribute? And if you cannot contribute, well, you need to pay more taxes, or you need to do something. So, and I think that, again, also, how can we make sure that there are more progressive taxes that, are really taxing those who need to pay, rather than what many countries do, that is, oh, well, those who have more money, they don't really pay, and we all normal residents pay a lot of taxes when it's not really fair. So, but I think that it's, of course, it's very political and it's very difficult to change.
There's one thing that remind me, Sonia, and teman-teman semua mengenai back to informality, the historical and the community participation, the kota raya, etc. When I talking about the informality, one thing I always remind to students, then the question of that informality somehow maintain the status quo, and the informality sometimes also can be seen from the concept of double exploitation. Then yes, we support informality as which has long historical effect, but at the same time also that few can be also trapped into maintaining double exploitation, meaning that the lower class should continue to serve the middle class and the upper class because of their cheap labor, because of cheap service, and so on. So maintaining informality at the same time also not really triggering the changing of the social structure to be more equal. Yeah, that's also very interesting to consider that informality. When we then talk about informality, informal sector, and poverty reduction, then I was reminded should be not only move them to live above the poverty line, but actually to change the whole social structure. Yeah, how to not only to move that poor people, 9% poor people in Indonesia to be live slightly above poverty line, but then how to make sure that this lower class can be transformed into middle class. And that's really the problem of Indonesia and developing countries. Yeah, the status quo situation between the elite, the middle class, and the lower class. When we continue maintain the idea, the perspective that this differences, yeah, patron-client relation, this kind, the power holder, the commoner, the another things, Sonia, also important, Kali Jawi, on July. That's also another interesting perspective in which we will have apa Mbak, Umuk Kampung, a festival called Umuk Kampung. This is informal sector, kampung dan sebagainya. The spirit of that festival, you may join on July, is to show to the public that kampung is something can be an alternative. Yeah? And that's supported. Remember, Sonia, Yani, when we asked Marco also to provide and remark. Yeah? Marco even provoking the idea of kampungisasi. Yeah? Not just kampung is not just the idea of maintaining the illegal informal settlement, but how to change the whole, atau how kampung become kind of a new spirit, yeah, a new ideology for future Indonesia. Lupa at that time, I forget that time. Actually, I also already have that term, yeah. Itu buku kan kampung kota and kota kampung. Supaya itu gak ada spirit, ya, not really spirit, but actually questioning, yeah, whether kampung is really a future Indonesian cities, and at least this book mentioning about that characteristic, yeah, kampung kota and kota kampung. I play with the word, with the meaning that when we talk about kota Indonesia, kampung is part of it, but when we talk about kampung, it's part of the city. Mungkin jawabannya Sonia I also asked to you, and when we start about the dichotomic view between global south, is there any alternative of the middle road or what we call now as a hybrid? Sorry. Hybrid itu maksudnya campuran gitu ya. Sekarang banyak orang bicara hybrid ya, hybrid car, hybrid. Why don't we talk about hybrid city?
Well, but I think the kampung is already hybrid because the kampung is very mixed. You have formal, informal, you have different type of housing, you have different type of arrangements. So the kampung is, which I think it's very different to like some other informal settlements in other countries that they tend to be a bit more homogeneous. In kampung, there is such a big diversity that you need to see it as a hybrid phenomenon. Yeah, yeah. There is one question in Zoom that I cannot answer much. I'm sorry about that, about middle-sized cities and solutions, but I can send you some resources if you want. If you send me an email, there are very interesting books. Maybe they can help you. I personally cannot give you any particular examples on that. I'm sorry about that in terms of informal transport. But yes, if you want to, we can type here the email, and if you want to send me an email, yeah, I'm happy to send you something. Thank you. Yes.
I want to know about what is the best solution of
About? The Gini. Ah. De nada. You are talking about Gini coefficient and the inequality? Yeah. Well, I think that because I think the main issue is that the income inequality is like lots of people earning same or low income and very, very few people, a very selective group of people increasing their incomes a lot, right? And that also happens in Indonesia. Indonesia has what, like 5 super billionaires or whatever. I don't know how they have a nickname, right? Like the 8, they were called the other day. Someone said the 8 dragons or the 8 tigers or the 8 9 dragon. Yeah. So the issue is that when you want to eliminate the inequality, you need to raise the income of the lower groups, right? And you need to try to make the distinction, the gap in between the low and the high, smaller. And so, and that's why many organizations that advocate for like reducing income differences, they say, well, the solution is taxes, right? So if the rich people pay more taxes, which is also, again, these progressive taxes, which is not the same as the taxes we pay in terms of, well, consumption, right? We all pay the same, even if we earn less money. So what they are saying is, well, there should be more taxes to income. If you get more money, you pay more taxes, which in some countries, they are a bit more, but in many countries, that's not the way it works, right? So that's one solution. But I think that at the same time, well, it's how can you make sure that income in the low income groups can be increased. And I think that in that, the problem is that you have all these informal arrangements of payments, right? Which is also, and this is why you need to be very careful with all this data, statistical data, because that is all mostly formal data, but there is so much that is informal. Like, for example, in Argentina, like there are many people who will get a one salary, but they don't really live with that salary because they get all these informal arrangements in terms of, well, or there are employers who tell you, well, formally, it's called something like the white, I pay you 100 pesos, but informally, I will pay you 100 more, but I don't have to pay taxes on that. So it's also this sort of different arrangement that people have, which is also the reason why it's so complex.
Sonia, terima kasih. Action on the social inequity, because to me, it seems that Indonesian government have quite at least clear or target on poverty reduction, which in 2045 Indonesia amassed zero poverty line. But seems that we don't really have a clear policy on social inequity. That's one thing. Yeah, I don't know whether, but it cannot be wait until. I mean, we have to have a clear policy on both two issue, poverty, reducing poverty, zero poverty at the same time. Also, income inequality. That's one thing. Second, that's informality. Remember, Sonia, on the fact also that from point of view of urban productivity, the contribution of urban economic to the total GDP, Indonesian urban productivity considered low because only half of the urban productivity in neighboring countries, Malaysia and even China. I'm actually also questioning whether that's related to the issue of informality, because informality somehow open a lot of job opportunity, somehow helping to reduce the poverty line, but really increasing the economics, urban economics. I don't know whether we have to ask economists whether informality, maintaining informality also somehow also not really increasing urban productivity. I don't know, but any consider that.
To me, the issue of the inequality, so it has become a global issue, a global problem. And that's why also, if you look at the SDGs, it appears on the SDG as something that, well, when in the past, many countries have to try to address poverty. Now, in many countries, poverty is much better. So there are like the poor groups are lower. So now we need to address inequality, but it's very hard because it's very political, I think, right? So, and you have inequality between countries, but also inequality within cities, within countries.
Contoh lain adalah yang informality. Let's say I always use as a case study, ya. With informal sector like pedagang bakso, selling around with the income, maybe they are considered living slightly above poverty line. Yeah? But there's no really, well, this is something that we have to learn, because another issue of informality is how to formalize them. And of course, we learn there's cost and benefit of formalizing the informal sector. What do you think of the informal bakso seller? Then we formalize them in Teras Malioboro and put them into one formal legal spot, transforming them into informal seller into more formal, with the ideas of having more consumer, more security of income, security of place, and then double, I don't know, but that's also interesting to question how is the best policy for informal sector if we like to push informal sector not only as a means for maintaining them at the above poverty line, but also increasing the welfare of the informal sector. Ya, itu juga menarik. Ya. I don't know if you have some comments.
I don't have comments on that, but I think it's also linked to the discussion we had previously about the informal land tenure, in the sense that, again, for many situations, if you provide land certificates, you increase chances of gentrification. Whereas like when you have like individual land titles, yeah. And so, and that's why it's not just about formal or informal, or necessarily like a good solution to become formalized, because there are sometimes more problems with the formality. Yeah.
Ya, jadi ada cost and benefit on informality and formality ya. Cost, we have to consider those two, cost and benefit of informality and formality, legality and illegality. In term of land tenure ya, begitu dulu informal nggak jelas, nggak ada orang mau beli. But once we formalize the tenure land issue, then it's come to the market and very easy. People then sell and buy that certificate. Bu Yani gimana? Sudah jam 11. Cukup ya? Unless if you have one, two last short question.
I think people are tired.
Ya.
They need a break.
Oke, ya. Bagus
Terima
ya.
kasih.
Terima kasih. Tapi I think this is really a warming up, not only for you, but also for me. As I said before, time flies very fast ya. Aku tuh masih merasa liburan nih. Minggu depan sudah harus ngajar itu.
Yeah.
Sonia as well, because I will Twitter I asked you. Sonia, what about your 3 months and gone already? Sonia akan balik lagi ke Queensland ya next week. And what she doesn't really like is that she also will start to teach again after berapa bulan kamu sabbatical? Already 5 months ya sabbatical ya. So terima kasih Sonia to warming up.
Terima kasih.
Put of thought.
Thank you.
Tepuk tangan.
Yeah. Thank you.
I suggest us to take a group picture.
Just before that, we will have closing remarks from our head of department. So Pak Deva Postaharolda Swasta will give us a short closing. Please, Pak Deva, the time is yours.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for Sonia for staying with us for at least 3 months. Jadi Bu Sonia sudah bersama kita selama 3 bulan ya. Jadi and the biggest secret is that Bu Sonia itu bisa bahasa Indonesia sebetulnya. Tapi beliau humble ya, tidak mau menunjukkan. Jadi tadi pakai bahasa Inggris, sebetulnya beliau bisa. Jadi kalau nanti mau diskusi, bahasanya beliau bisa. Nih, my friend told me that you are a very bright person in learning bahasa Indonesia. Jadi hanya itu saja. Next time in Indonesia. Sure. Jadi terima kasih sekali Bu Sonia. It's a very pleasure for us to have you here as our guest selama 3 bulan, dan sebetulnya kami sedih ya. We are very sad to hear that you will leaving for Australia next week ya. Monday ya.
Oh,
Tapi
so soon.
I already have news from our colleagues from Brawijaya. They said that you will come at least in September. Yes, September. Please don't forget to go to Yogyakarta.
Visit us again. Yeah.
Nanti akan ketemu Bu Sonia lagi di sini insya Allah bulan September ya. Silakan kalau yang tesis segala macamnya terkait dengan bidang Bu Sonia nanti bisa ngobrol ya. Bisa ngobrol ya. Itu saja, terima kasih Bu Sonia.
We have
Jalan sehat selalu, terima kasih.
We have token of appreciation for Ibu Sonia. Pak Deva or Pak Bobby will. Pak Deva. Terus foto bersama. Thank you very much, Ibu Sonia, for the collaboration, for the thought-provoking presentations. Thank you everyone for participating. Also, thank you all participants on Zoom. Thank you very much. So we can close this.